Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel, great YouTube, and welcome to, of course, another Wednesday review. Today, of course, I am reviewing the fourth and newest album from a Swedish hard rock slash heavy metal band, Night. And the album, of course, is titled High Tides, Distant Skies, and was released through, of course, the Sign Records on September 11th of this year. So, for those who may not be familiar with Night, they of course are a Swedish, again, band, and they were formed in 2011 and of course released their debut album, which was self-titled, in 2013. And in some ways they definitely did emerge in the new wave or traditional heavy metal scene, but I guess that only lasted at least past the first album. Or at least was more present on the first album, because since Soldiers of Time, it seems like they started to really move more and more away from the more traditional NWO THM sound. It wasn't pretty much no longer that Swedish or just that straight up traditional metal sound. It really started to really kind of change with Soldiers of Time, and really became even more apparent with, of course, Wrath of the World in 2017. And of course, since then, they pretty much are at this point really throwing in, almost really showing the more Blue Oyster Cult influences. But this, of course, is their newest album, so let's see how things even more progressed, I guess you can say, with this album. How did they evolve into, of course, High Tides, Distant Skies? So without further ado, let's definitely get into, of course, High Tides, Distant Skies from Night. So, before I really get into my thoughts on the album, let's definitely do a track listing rundown. This, of course, consists of 9 songs, and it all clocks in at 36 minutes and 57 seconds. So, these 9 songs consist of course, Shadow Gold, Burning Sky, Crimson Past, Falling in the Black, Running Away, Here on My Own, Lost in a Dream, Give Me to the Night, and Under the Moonlight Sky. So, when listening to this album and going back and listening to some of their past albums and just seeing how they were just progressing and evolving with each album, I mean, I love their very first record. I think that was a very good, solid, straight up heavy metal record, but I definitely do kind of see that they definitely did come into a little of their own sound, and definitely really took place for sure with, of course, Soldiers of Time, and it really came into more of its own sound with, of course, Wrath of the World. But with this album, while you definitely get a little bit of that Blue Oyster Cult feel, they really kind of went back to being more straightforward in a way, but not on the level of the very first record. Instead, it's still very more classic rock, more classic hard rock approach, but still has some of that Blue Oyster Cult experimental feel to it. But again, and I think the best way to describe it is combining the out of this world Blue Oyster Cult sound with, of course, the twin guitar attack of bands like Thin Lizzy, and to an extent some of the other new wave or British heavy metal bands, or here and there UFO and Scorpions. Definitely that's kind of what you really kind of get with this album. It's more simple. Hell, again, the time length of the album is probably their shortest at this point. This is, again, the probably the shortest length album they've released yet. So every bit of it definitely lets you know that it is more simplified. But not to the point where it's too simple. You still get a little bit of that experimental feel with this sound. You still get a little bit of that very otherworldly feel, but it's just done in more of a really cool way, and it's definitely great. Again, you get plenty of hard rockers on this album, but you also get plenty of really cool, very almost ballady-like stuff that you would expect from, of course, Blue Oyster Cult, for example. But you get plenty of that twin guitar attack. So, but without just trying to summon up the sound of the album, let's now get into some songs, which I'm actually going to be talking about every of these 9 songs because I've got plenty of thoughts on this. This is one where I really couldn't just pick out at least a couple of songs that really just make the album for me. This is one of those where I kind of really have to go into some idea or give you some ideas of every of these songs. I really have to go in a little bit of depth into these. So, without further ado, let's definitely get into some to the songs on this album. I mean, it opens up with Shadow Gold, and it's a good opener. I mean, I would say it's a nice way to open up the album. It's not too heavy, not too rocking, but it does have a good rock feel, but it is very melodic as well. Got a very cool vibe to it. Again, plenty of groove, accompanied by some great twin leads. Just a good song overall, and of course, coming in the footsteps after this song is Burning Up, and again, this time it dials up the energy by incorporating that galloping and new wave or British heavy metal feel with, of course, the atmosphere of classic Blue Oyster Cult. It definitely does that, and really reinforcing my analogy and of summoning up what Night have been transitioning to since, of course, Soldier in Time and Wrath of the World. And it just seems to really come into full control on this album. And Burning Sky, you start to get that. But then we get into, of course, Crimson Past, and really just shows the Blue Oyster Cult influence. This could have been written by Buck Dahmer himself. It's a great track. And of course, same goes for Falling in the Black. It's a melodic rocker that could have been on Spectres, but this track does also incorporate some prog elements too, but in more of an early UFO kind of way there, throwing in the UFO kind of influence there finally into at least to sum it up a track. Yeah, so Falling in the Black is a good song. Up next, of course, is Running Away, and again, it mixes the upbeat rock of classic Thin Lizzy with the experimental vibe of classic Blue Oyster Cult. It's definitely a good track that definitely shows a lot of that, a lot of their influences. Definitely more 70s inspired, but still very good though. Here on My Own is a galloping heavy rocker in the vein of classic Thin Lizzy, but it also adds some mystic touch. Again, think Blue Oyster Cult for an example as well. Definitely, again, I mean, the Blue Oyster Cult influences is really apparent on this album, but again, mixing a little bit of that hard rock edge to it of, again, bands like UFO and Thin Lizzy and Scorpions, I think really does add an extra element to this album and works it to advantage. It's a good song. Next up, of course, is Lost in a Dream. This also sounds like it could have been on Spectres. It's a good song. Finally, we then get into Give Me to the Night, and this just comes in blazing. Fast and energetic. Just, again, very much some of that classic new wave or British heavy metal feel and so on. It's a good song. Finally, we get, of course, to Under the Moonlight, and this was the first lead single released prior to the album, and of course it ends the album, and well, it takes you right back to, of course, I mean, most of the comparisons I made when it comes to Blue Oyster Cult is usually Spectres. This time, this one, it takes you again right back to, of course, Fire of Unknown Origin, with, of course, with its outer-worldly atmosphere and catchy hooks. Think of Burning for You, for example. So there you go. There is, of course, High Tides, Distant Skies from Night, and my score for this album is, of course, a 9.25 out of 10. This is a absolutely solid album. I think this is probably my favorite Night album since their self-titled 2013 album. I mean, not to say that Soldier of Time was a bad album, even though I think that's probably the weakest album within Knight's discography, but Wrath of the World was also a very cool album. Really, definitely more closer to, of course, the more so like the mid to late 70s in terms of heavy 70s kind of stuff. And this one, on the other hand, is more straightforward. It definitely brings back more, again, some of that very hard-edged guitar tone, but again, not in the way you would expect from, say, again, their very first album, which was more straightforward, traditional heavy metal. With this one, it's more in a hard rock, more, again, classic hard rock style, more attitude. But it works. It's a good album. Got plenty of great leads, plenty of good writing on this album. I mean, to say that this is the most original album is a little bit of a overstatement, I would say. Because I think it's not the most original album, but I mean, it's not, but the thing is, I don't base my judgments on how original an album is. I base it on how I feel towards an album, and towards this one, I feel this is probably, again, their best album so far. Probably, again, their best since their debut full-length album, in my honest opinion, even though, again, that's not to take away from albums like Wrath of the World, for example, which is a good album and definitely helped them explore different styles instead of just being stuck to, of course, one thing, which is kind of something you get with a lot of new wave or traditional heavy metal bands. But sometimes also when it comes to that topic, it either works or it doesn't work. For example, Enforcer. Anyway, still though, this definitely works. This was a good album. Again, this album, of course, has been out since September 11th. I'd like to, since all of you might have heard this album, definitely let me know what were your thoughts on this album. But for those who haven't heard this album, well, I definitely do recommend checking this album out. If you are expecting the more straightforward heavy metal of their very first album, you might be disappointed. But if you're just looking for good straight-up guitar-driven classic hard rock in the vein of bands like, for example, Blue Oyster Cult, or Thin Lizzy, or UFO, or Scorpions, or those bands that, for example, are some of the more hard rock style bands of the new wave or British heavy metal movement, definitely, I think you'll do yourself no wrong by checking this album out and giving it a chance. I think this is a good album in its own right. So with that, I hope y'all enjoyed. This is Every Thrasher Sam out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.